So how many of you want more success in your careers? Say yes. How many of you want more fulfillment in life? Say yes. How many of you want to leave this room sexier and better looking than when you walked in? Say yes. That's me. How many of you want me to stop asking you questions that end with you saying yes? I'll do that. Well, the reason I ask all these questions is because, in fact, when I hear most motivational speakers say those questions, I call them hey stupid questions, because who would say no to any of that? But it's actually true. Those are things we actually deal with. But life isn't quite ideal, is it? You go out, you do something, it works, but then eventually something falls apart. You're trying to build a business. You hit every landmine, or as we call them in our war zones, IEDs, every bomb on the road. And things just don't work out. Things aren't always ideal. And some people give up and quit. Some people get taken out. People fall apart mentally. And we've had these things happen in our careers. Sometimes you get laid off. Sometimes your business goes under. You lose a bunch of money. A client stabs you in the back and runs the other way. Or a coworker. I know some of you have had some experiences there. Sometimes it's in our marriages, in our personal lives, or our relationships, where we thought somebody was on our side and then they weren't, and things fell apart. Or sometimes it's even just a personal injury or trauma. We all go through things in life. We all get blown up. And I've realized that a lot of people who make it through have some things in common. And that's what I really want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you for the next few minutes about how to stand firm when everything around you is blowing up. And it's interesting because so many people who have gone through these horrible, bad things, they tend to have some things in common when they're able to successfully overcome them. And I know as a speaker, a lot of people say, Brian, don't get up and talk about anything bad. You have to be more positive. I'm positive bad things are going to happen in your life and mine. I know what some of you are thinking. You're going, this guy is the worst motivational speaker ever. But it's true, isn't it? Things blow up all around us all the time, and you don't see them coming. And when those things do happen, what do you do to hang on? When you're asking those questions at 2 a.m, when you wake up in bed and you say, is this fight even worth fighting? Is life even worth living anymore on the extreme end? I've met some of those people. Should I throw in the towel with this thing, this business deal, this whatever it is you're fighting? Is this thing worth getting through everything I'm going through? Well, I'm going to share with you a story that's going to totally blow your mind, and it's also going to challenge your thinking on your perspective on the suffering and challenges that you all face. Because everything that we face, by the way, is pretty common. A lot of people tend to think they suffer alone, that nobody understands. Look, in like 5,000 years of recorded human history, you and I aren't the first ones to deal with the issues we face. And so, before I tell you that story, though, it's important that I tell you a little bit about why I'm even up here talking to you about that. Because to me, as a military guy, maybe it's the military, maybe it's just me as a guy, number one thing to me that's important when anyone's going to teach me about something is a little word called credibility. I'd like to learn from people who have actually walked a path I'm trying to walk, or have been down a path that I'm going down and have been able to successfully get through it. I was raised in just west of Detroit, Michigan. My parents divorced when I was 11. Horrible thing. Funny thing actually happened. Jackson County Courthouse, for the first time in history of Jackson, Michigan, actually got metal detectors installed the day after my parents' divorce. That's our claim to fame. I was never popular in school, but when we made front page news of the Jackson Citizen Patriot newspaper, everybody knew who Brian Fleming was. Yeah, crazy times, but growing up, I wasn't a child of privilege. Like many of you, I really didn't have a lot growing up. I used to think that we went to my grandmother's house to eat food because she had better food. It turns out she had food. My mother was very good at hiding that. And so I just thought I didn't know much other than struggle, and then I was basically on my own at 11. Dad went to jail. Mom moved to Florida. I chose to stay there and didn't really have anyone to guide me. It was a real turbulent time, and some of you can relate to that. But then at 18, I did the next best thing. I joined Army infantry during a time of war because I did really well in high school, but I was really sick and tired of studying. I told my mom I need to jump out of some airplanes, shoot some big guns, and blow some stuff up. Then I'll go back to college. And they'll pay for it, that whole thing. And things didn't quite turn out the way I had originally planned. Because as you may or may not know, when you join Army infantry during a time of war, things can happen. And so I deployed with the U.S. Army's 10th Mountain Division in 2006. There you go, we got 10th Mountain, all right. Yeah, 2006. Got there, March, and about a month later, my vehicle ran over a bomb that was buried in the road. And called it a roadside bomb, IED. Here's a picture of it. That's actually a double stack of anti-tank mines that were buried in the road. We were in the Arghandab Valley of Afghanistan, and 2 mines stripped together, supposed to take out a tank. It hit our Humvee. We ran it right over. Fortunately, nobody died that day, and that was April 18th of 2006. And I was in the back seat of that Humvee on the other side, and I was thankfully not injured, and so I was able to get out, run around, open the door, help one other guy out who the blast had gone off underneath his seat and injured him. And I'm happy to report that everyone made it out that day alive. And it's always ideal. Truck was a total mess, as you can see. Being from right near Detroit, I like to think this wasn't made up in Detroit. But with the stuff that bomb was packing, it wouldn't really matter much if it was from Detroit or not. But this is another picture. That's actually my seat, the back seat right there. That's where I was sitting before this thing blew to pieces. And that was about 7 o'clock in the morning. So that was April 18th of 06. Nice little wake up that day. And it's interesting because we got back from this mission 2 days after this explosion. It actually took us 2 days to get back to the base because we were one vehicle short. And reinforcements were 2 days away. We had about 17 guys in my platoon, and we were all out there by ourselves. And so when we returned back to the base, I actually had an email that my mother had written to me that day that we returned. And she said, "Hey, Brian, I don't want to weird you out or anything." She said, "But a couple of days ago, I got this really strange, intense feeling to pray for your protection." I'm like, "You don't say." I wrote her back, and I said, "Yeah, something happened, but we're good." I didn't tell her what it was, obviously, don't want her to worry. She saw it on the news, apparently. And I thought, man, I was always told growing up that God tells women everything. I ain't talked to her in like 2 weeks, and I'm like, whew, stay on mama's good side. Well, I say that jokingly, but I don't know, because I've also been married. In fact, my wife and I got married 3 months before I went to Afghanistan. And here in about a month, we will celebrate 14 years of happily being married. And so I'm grateful for that. Thank you. The interesting thing is that was the first explosion. There were 2 major explosions that took place, though. So this was on April 18th. But on July 24th, Taliban wasn't done trying to play with us. And I was in another Humvee. And it's very interesting the reason I was in this Humvee, because I was actually in the process of reclassing my job from infantry to what's called EOD. How many of you know what EOD is? If you don't know, it's explosive ordnance disposal. They're the bomb squad. So if it blows up, it's their business. If you see that guy running, you better be in front of him. Got blown up on the way to change my job to EOD. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not supposed to be EOD. Here's your sign, And it's interesting because the night before, I was on the phone with my wife, and she said, "Brian, I'm praying that you'll come home in the end of July." This was like July 2nd or 3rd, and there were rumors going around that my unit was coming home in the end of July specifically. However, we might also get extended at the end of July, and we'll find out probably the day of, and extend it for 3 more months. Well, my wife said, "Well, you know what? I'm praying and believing that you're going to come home in the end of July." Well, on July 24th, a suicide bomber tried to kill us. On July 27th, I arrived at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas. The end of July. I just asked my wife to be a little bit more specific next time she's thinking of me. Nonetheless, I came home in the end of July. July 27th. Try and stay on Mom's good side and Jamie's good side because that power was working to my favor, but don't want him turning on me anytime soon because apparently when they think and pray stuff, he listens. So, but this is what happened. A suicide bomber got right up next to my door. I was in the hop-armored Humvee. It was bulletproof glass for windows, armor-plated, and we went to pass him on the left because he pulled out in front of us. He had a minivan loaded down with explosives. We didn't know, obviously. I was in the front passenger seat. So we're driving along. Everything's fine. We're 2 miles from Kandahar Airfield, which is our destination, and he's basically from me to this shield as we're passing him, and the entire minivan blows up next to us. And I have no recollection of the explosion. People say, Brian, do you remember it? No. I woke up in a ditch on the side of the road. I had no idea what happened. This is actually the vehicle, the one that almost got me personally. Me and one other guy was injured, but the suicide bomber actually, he was the only guy to die that day. I think that's kind of funny. I'm like, oh, mission accomplished, sort of. I'm like, what do you say to that, you know? It's like, yeah. So yeah, that's my door blasted open. I woke up out there in the dirt somewhere, and blood pouring out of my face. Didn't know what happened. Nobody's eating breakfast still, right? You're about to not be hungry after this one of these next pictures I'm going to show you. But that's the minivan he was driving, or what's left of it. I also don't like to think that was made up in Detroit. And this was me right after it happened, though. That's actually pretty tame for this kind of injury. But that's a full face and neck second-degree burn. You can see there, the white on my chin is actually my normal skin color. This is after they cleaned me up a bit. And that's my left hand. Skin grafts. So what the doctor said was, hey, Brian, we're going to have to take skin from one part of your body and put it onto your hands and maybe your face and neck. But then he made a mistake. He told me where they were going to start taking the skin from. To skin graft my face, possibly. Some of you in the medical community are already laughing. They normally start by taking skin from your rear end, so your scarring will be minimal when you're dressed or wearing shorts. And I'm like, Doc, you can't take that and put it up here. I'm like, you can let me die. That's like cruel and unusual punishment. I'm thinking like my wife will never kiss me again. All those names I was called as a kid, they'd be true. Then I'm like, thank God I don't have a tattoo there, because then it would be here. Yeah, don't visualize that. They ended up not having to skin graft my face, which is why you can't tell anything happened to me. I'm extremely fortunate, because most of my friends who went through something like this, either you can tell something happened to them physically or they didn't make it out alive. I don't know why I healed so well, but I did. And so I'm grateful for that. And this is the other hand. It's interesting because they got me into Brooke Army Medical Center. My wife actually showed up before I did. They strolled me in there. By the way, they had me from Kandahar to San Antonio in 3 days. 3 days. I know there's a lot of complaints out there about medical care and the military medical system. Those are probably legit. But I'll tell you from personal experience, no place put me through more physical hell on earth than Brooke Army Medical Center, but they also put me back together and did everything they had to do so I could live a better life afterwards. And I'm extremely grateful for the military system and for getting me out of there alive. When I rolled in there, they strolled me in on a gurney. My wife was standing there waiting for me, and my face had a lot of, at that point, a lot of this dried stuff on the outside. It was really nasty, blood on my lips. And she leaned down and she kissed my burned, bloody lips. And I said, look, you showed up. This is gross to me. You don't have to kiss me. Like, I know you're not going anywhere. You're faithful. Thank you. Well, she kissed me anyway and had my blood on her lips. It's an whole gross story. But that's the kind of woman I married. Anybody from Texas in here, by the way? All right. My wife is from Fort Worth, Texas. And when it comes to your women, y'all make them good down there. So then, doctor says, all right, we need to take him into the shower room and clean him up. I thought, great, I can finally get a shower, because I hadn't showered in about a week. There was no place to do it. It was 120, 130 degrees, dirty. Well, they took me into the shower room, laid me on this metal table, and started spraying me with water. And the head nurse looked at me and he said, hey, Sergeant Fleming, we're going to do this as quickly as possible so it'll be as painless as possible. I didn't know what he was talking about. But it was at that point that him and 2 or 3 other nurses all pulled out razor blades, and they actually had to shave the burn, charred skin off of my hands and my face and my neck. It's the worst process you'll ever endure. If you ever know somebody who gets burned severely, don't tell them about it. In fact, you're going to have another speaker here, Jason, who's burned on over 40% of his body. His experience was probably 1,000 times worse than mine due to the surface area burns, and I can't imagine what he experienced. But I'll tell you, I'll be honest, that was the only time in my life I legitimately prayed to die. Because it was that breaking point we all have where it's like, if I'm just asleep, if I'm just unconscious, I won't be in pain anymore. Now, I'm also grateful I didn't get what I asked for. Sometimes we think we want something in moments of despair or pain, and we think we can get out of it, and it would be best if we could somehow die or get out. But the problem with that is that when you're in a situation like that, it's kind of like the fog of war. It's like you can only see right in front of you. You can't see the big picture. And so our vision is limited when we're going through things in life that are testing us. And so realizing that we might not have all the information or the whole story is one of the real big keys to enduring and to keep going. Now, this is a picture of my wife, Jamie. Like I said, she stayed with me. This is they give you this thing called a Purple Heart if you get blown up or shot. Nobody really wants one. I mean, nobody really wants any awards in the military, but nobody really wants that one because you have to get basically blown up or shot or stabbed to get one. But the interesting thing that happens is that when you get a Purple Heart, most states will give you a Purple Heart license plate. Now, I thought I'm going to have some fun with this one. I tried boom and bang and ouch. Somebody in Texas took all those, surprisingly, so I couldn't do that. So I remember thinking back on the suicide bomber and thinking, yeah, he was the only guy who died. So what do you say? What do you say to a guy who tried to kill himself, trying to kill you and your friends, and he was the only one who went? Well, I put nice try on my license plate. That's Roger that, sir. And so that's pretty much all the pictures I have there. But here's the deal. The biggest thing is not this is what Brian went through. It's not about what I went through. It's about what I took away from it that actually relates to your life. Because I had 14 months at Burke Army Medical Center to think about putting my life back together and how I was going to do that. And a lot of people are wondering, okay, Brian, what took you from that point, laying in a ditch in Kandahar, to being able to stand up and talk about this and do what I do? And there were a lot of lessons. There were a lot of keys, but I realized that as I got to know people, there were about 3 major keys that I found, in my opinion, that a lot of the world's most resilient people all had in common. And I learned this stuff by people I met at the medical center who were also patients, mentors I've had, people who have survived just unreal things. I have friends who are burn survivors. I have friends who are amputees, missing arms, legs, eyes, ears, both, all. One guy is missing both legs and arms. He's like the most productive person you'll ever meet in your life. Runs marathons and everything. It's insane. And looking at those people, trying to put my own life back together, I would think to myself, what did that guy do? What did that lady do? What did that person do to sort of get through all this stuff that I'm going through? And I realized that even though we all get hurt in a bunch of different ways, we all deal with a lot of the same mental battles. That's where the real battleground takes place. And I learned that there were 3 things that were foundational with everybody I met who was able to move beyond whatever it was they were going through. And the first thing was that they were either pursuing or they had found a sense of meaning in the suffering they were going through. They felt like they were suffering for a cause, or they felt there was a very strong reason for it. And that really helped them stand up under the pressure. In fact, I remember the very first time somebody asked me to come and stand on their stage, I literally stood up on a stage like this and spoke for about 1 minute. I was still wrapped up in burn bandages. My face was still red from the burns. It was about 5 months after my injury. And I got up and I said, "Hi, I'm Brian. I got blown up. Guess I'm still here for a reason. Go for it." Like, worst motivational speech ever. But then my life changed when I stepped off the stage. It wasn't what happened up here that changed everything for me. It's what happened when I stepped off the stage, and here's what happened. I got off the stage, and a young lady comes up to me. She was about 21, 22 years old, about the same age I was at the time. Didn't even give me her name. She just said, Brian, growing up, I was raped and I was molested and I was abused. My father abused me. My boyfriend was abusive. He just dumped me and I tried to kill myself and I failed. I had no idea what to say to this person. And I'm just thinking, sorry, that sounds really rough. But then she said this. She tagged this on the end before I could stop talking. She said, but you know what, Brian? She said, if you can survive all that and get through it, she said, I think I can get through this. Now, I don't know if you've ever had an experience like that. And to some of you, it might not sound that profound. But when you just went through the worst pain you've ever been through, and now somebody says, hey, I'm not going to go home and try to kill myself again. You find a great sense of meaning starting to grow, and you start thinking to yourself, maybe my story is part of a greater story being told. I just can't see all of it right now. And that evening, I told the guy who trained me in speaking how to use my story, the guy who brought me to that stage that night, I said, I don't know what just happened, but I have to do this. It wasn't like, hey, Dave, I'm going to consider public speaking as part of my career. No, it was like, there are other people like that girl out there. I need to meet them. Like, this speaking thing, I have to do it. I'm going to do it or die trying. There's no other reason to live. I've only been that desperate in my heart in one other time in my life, and that was fighting for our lives in Afghanistan, when something gripped me that deep and it had to happen. I really didn't even choose to do this speaking thing. Standing up here, it's more like I was pulled in this direction by something inside of me that I didn't know was there. Through a really bad situation, I discovered something that was inside of me. I think if we'd be real honest, a lot of you could probably say the same thing. And I started doing some research on this. Who else has had experiences like this? Well, in reading and researching, I found out about a guy named Viktor Frankl. How many of you know who Viktor Frankl is? A few of you. Viktor Frankl was a Austrian psychiatrist during the 1940s. And he was a Jew, and he and his family were taken to Auschwitz and other Nazi prison camps. His entire family was killed except for, I think, his sister. His pregnant wife was taken. They were all exterminated. Viktor Frankl happened to survive all the prison camps and make it out. And one thing he always said, while he was in the prison camps, he always imagined that even though his odds were 1 in 28 to get out of there alive, those were the odds. 1 in 28 is that you were getting out. So the odds were overwhelmingly against him. He used to imagine, and he used to plan, and he'd think about one day he's going to go around to colleges and universities, and he's going to lecture on the psychology of concentration camps and how it affects the human condition. He had this thing he was living for. And one of the things he said in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is one of the absolute best books ever written, ever. If you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, you're missing out big time. You're not living as good a life as you could. And it can be read in about 2 hours. And in this book, he says this, when it comes to suffering, and it's amazing because it explains what I went through, what I experienced. He said, when it comes to suffering, he said, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. Well, a lot of people ask the question of why. That's pretty much searching for meaning. We're looking for an answer, closure. When I read that, I knew immediately what happened in my life when I met that young lady when I got off stage. He said, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. I suddenly, 5 months only after my injury, began finding a sense of meaning in the pain I went through. And when people say, Brian, how do you go from such a low point to coming back from that and living productively and successfully and happily and doing something with your life, how do you do that? That was the foundation of it. And it didn't have anything to do with me just rehearsing these, I'm good enough, I'm strong enough. I was jacked up. And I knew my condition was worse than it had ever been. But there was something outside of me that someone else was depending on. And when she found hope, it reinforced a sense of meaning. I don't know if you've ever experienced that in your life, but you'll never be the same if you do. The next thing that happened was when people go through things, the most resilient people in the world I've met, they not only have a sense of meaning, but they have mentors in their lives. And I understood this, obviously, because I was in the military. Chain of command, learn from somebody who's better than you. And what happened, when I was at Brooke Army Medical Center, I met the guy who was my mentor, who became my mentor and one of my best friends, a guy named Dave Reaver, who was burned in Vietnam horribly. And he started, after getting out of Vietnam, he became a speaker. He began writing books, and he's been doing it for over 40-some years now. He came to Brooke Army Medical Center, talked to me and about 20 or 30 other guys who had been shot up, blown up, burned up. And he got up on stage, and he started taking off his prosthetic ear, talking about how he plays the piano by ear. He's burned in the face. He talks about how the phosphorus grenade blew up next to his face in Vietnam. He was on a riverboat, and he jumped in the water. He said, Brian, my skin was burned off my body. It was floating in the water. He said, Brian, I was beside myself. He said, Brian, I had to pull myself together. I'm looking at that going, this dude's sense of humor is twisted, and I love it. You know the real thing that happened in that moment, though? I saw somebody who was in a similar position to me, that he'd been where I was, but he wasn't there anymore. He's been married to the same woman for over 50 years, happily. I thought, this is somebody I can model maybe. Maybe I can learn something. I didn't want to get out of the military and be a cop because I was infantry. I was done dealing with the scum of the earth. A lot of guys do. It's needed. I love those guys. But for me, I thought, I don't know where I'm going after this. But there needs to be more. And he said, Brian, if you want, I'll show you how to do something with all this. My family tree changed because I met that one man. He became one of my best friends, my guide, my mentor, one of my best friends. And he said, Brian, if you want to speak, I'll show you exactly everything you need to do. He put me up on his stages for about a year straight, took me on the road with him. There's no amount of money I could ever pay Dave to repay him for what he did for me. I call it the unicorn experience because that doesn't happen. But it happened for me. And I realized the power that one person could have in my life. But then I also realized I can be that person in somebody else's life too. What's the ripple effect when you have a good effect on somebody's life and their family tree shifts? I come from nothing. I come from a broken family. My family's whole. I grew up poor. Hey, I'm not the richest man in the world, but I'm not poor anymore. That makes a difference, especially when you come from a place that I do. Now I can actually give back to causes I believe in, and I can help the world be better, not only just through my speaking, but through what I'm able to do with it. That makes a difference in my life. It's hard to feel bad for yourself when you're around people, helping other people who have other stories of things they're going through right now. It makes a difference. So not only did I find a sense of meaning in what I was going through, not only did I have mentors in my life, but I found a mission greater than myself that I was living for. And every person I find who overcomes extreme setbacks, extreme traumas, extreme obstacles in their lives, they're typically living for the accomplishment of a mission greater than themselves, whatever that is. And I know that might sound cliche because a lot of people talk about living for something greater. That's literally what pulled me through the worst time in my life. A lot of people are trying to push that boulder uphill. Because there was something greater than me, it was pulling me through it. And I still went through a lot of stuff. It was still a struggle for years. I still have headaches every day from the bomb blast and everything else, the traumatic brain injury. But I'm doing something in spite of it. I'm not just taking medicine and sitting on my couch and watching TV and going nowhere in life because of it. Even though nobody would really feel that bad for me. If it was, they would say, well, look what he went through. Of course he's that way. And we're all at a different place in our journeys. If you're there, if you know someone who's there, that person has more in them. They just haven't found it yet. They haven't found, luckily like I did, they didn't have a Dave come into their life. And that's one of my big missions with what I do is to be that person that Dave was to me, to be that for somebody else. So I want to ask you in your own life, are you doing that? I know that with this organization, you have an excellent opportunity to be that in someone else's life, through it made for veterans in this case. Now, you could be asking yourself, what did Dave get out of helping me? Like, what did he personally get out of it? Well, he never charged me a nickel, ever. He didn't charge me any money. to teach me how to do this. I speak 50 to 70 times a year all over the world. He didn't teach me, he didn't do this and charge me money. He did it because he cared. That's the difference it made. And when somebody does something like for us, we tend to have this inclination to reciprocate it, to pay it forward, to do that. So I want you to think about what larger mission are you living for in your life, because that's going to make the difference. A sense of meaning, mentors in your life, a community like this one that you're actively a part of and doing something with. We don't get any personal satisfaction out of being a part of an organization like this one or any other if we're not actively, personally involved in doing something. It was when I stepped up on stage with my memory issues, by the way. You think you're afraid to get on stage? It's hard for me to remember what I had for breakfast most days. And now I'll get up on a stage in front of people. What if I forget what I'm going to say? I care more about the message and the people in the audience than looking bad. I'm like, oh, well, there goes most of the anxiety. I tell people I never meant to do this anyway. Brian, you suck at speaking. Well, I never meant to do it anyway. If I'm ever that bad, I'll just go do something else. But also sometimes just when you get through something, after you finally get through something, you're like, boy, glad that chapter's behind us. You ever heard somebody go, boy, life couldn't get any worse? You ever hear somebody say that? I can tell you right now, don't you ever say life cannot get any worse. Because one thing life can always get is what? Worse. It just can. And sometimes it comes in ways that affect us. Sometimes they come in ways that affect people we love. In fact, you might be looking at my story, my injury, and say, Brian, well, you were attacked, suicide bomber, 14 months at a medical center, burn treatment, reconstructive surgery, which, yeah, they did not put that skin on my face, thankfully. Oh, check this out. That's my 10-minute warning. Stairway to Heaven. I was raised on classic rock and rated R movies, so. Not a joke, true story. Yeah, so, but we think, what could get possibly worse? Well, just sometimes you have to brace for it, because sometimes things can get worse. And what could be worse than what happened to me? Well, something happened 2 years after I was injured, but it didn't happen to me. And I received a message. I was at the Riverwalk, at a hotel at the Riverwalk in San Antonio, Texas, and I received an email from my former squad leader at my first unit informing me that my roommate had been killed in action in Iraq. Heck of a way to find out, huh? He said, yeah, they got into a gunfight. They were ambushed in the streets. Cody was returning fire. One of his guys was wounded and laying in the kill zone exposed. And apparently Cody ran back into the kill zone to grab his friend and get him out back behind cover. And he died that day trying to save his friend. Now, I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this, but in that moment when I read that, it's like I got tunnel vision. I couldn't hear anything. It's like time stood still, and my body just, you don't even know what you're feeling in that moment. Some of you can relate to that. Some of you know what that feels like. It's a weird feeling. And I couldn't even talk. I literally couldn't talk. It had been so long since I'd cried, I didn't know how to cry. So some noise came out of me. And I'm just going through this. And so after a while, I started thinking, what can I possibly do to honor Cody? Because most people just don't run into gunfire to save their friend. He probably knew he wasn't getting out of that. And he didn't have to do it. That's the kind of people I've gotten to know, the heroes I've gotten to know and have a part of my life. And so what I decided to do was, when I wrote my book, Redeployed, it's about how combat veterans can fight the battle within and win the war at home. I dedicated this book to Cody. And it's interesting. By the way, I have these out at the Chase booth. We only brought 2 boxes, and so we only have a limited number. But while I have it in my hand, I wrote this book with my friend Chad Robichaud, and he did 9 tours in Afghanistan. So if you know somebody who's struggling with issues in their life, especially if they're a veteran, we kind of get it, and we've been able to both work through a lot of the issues we've had to face. And they're $20, and when you go out there and you get one, we match every book 1 for 1 that leaves that table. And when I go speak for the military, I show up with 200 or 300, 400 of these at a time, and we give them away. because the military can't always buy them. You know the biggest thing, though? A lot of people are willing to read it because they relate to me and Chad. They know we've kind of been there. A lot of people don't want advice. They won't take your advice. They don't want to hear it. But a lot of the military men and women, they're willing to listen to us because they know our stories, or they can see it when they read the book. And so this is one way that we're serving our veterans and military in addition to what I do. Again, this is part of my mission. It's bigger than me. It brings no credit to me. It brings no recognition to me. This is something we do. When I first did this, we ran out of books. And we didn't, this was years ago. I was giving them all away, and guess what? I didn't have any money left. I'm like, crap, I can't do more of these. I thought, maybe people will want to support this. And it's been a huge effort ever since. And I want to ask every single one of you in here, I don't know if we have enough books for everybody, but if you will, go to the Chase booth afterwards, get one of these so we can continue getting these out to the military. That's my request for you. And I told you in the beginning of this talk that I had a story that was going to blow your mind, and it was going to change your perspective on the challenges you faced. So here's what happened. Here's that story. How many of you want to hear it? Wonder what it is? It's kind of a bogus claim, right? Story's going to blow your mind? Well, it blew my mind. I was speaking after this book came out in Indian Wells, California, just west of Palm Springs, east of Palm Springs. And it was for a military fundraiser. A lot of the Marines from 29 Palms came down and had some fun with them. Being an Army guy, they were Marines. We had all kinds of fun. By the way, we put pictures in the back of this book. We did that so the Marines can enjoy it too. And that was the joke I gave. And the whole front row was like 30 of them. And I'm like, I'm not going to get out of this place alive. We loved it. Here's what happened, though. Remember, I dedicated this book to Cody. I'm telling the story. I'm done speaking. This lady walks up to me. She's about this high. And she puts her hand out to shake my hand. And she says, "Hi, Brian. I'm Cody's mother." Yeah. I'm like, "You don't say." I'm like, "Hi." She said, "Yeah, somebody gave me your book. And my friend had gotten it, and she called me and said that you dedicated that book to Cody." And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I did." And as we talked for about 40 minutes after my talk, her and I sat, we just had a great conversation. You know what she told me her greatest fear is as a Gold Star mother? By the way, Cody was her only kid. Cody was her only son. Her greatest fear, she told me, is that with Cody was that who he was and what he did would be forgotten. And I was able to tell her, at least in this little way, this book will outlive us. It'll be on Amazon and elsewhere when her and I are both gone. But I was able to tell her, this Gold Star mother who lost her only kid in war, to help quench that only biggest fear that she had, that her son will not be forgotten, and that what he did will continue to be told over and over, and people will know it. Isn't that wild? Because I look at all that stuff that happened to me. Blown up, burned up, 14 months at a medical center, reconstructive surgery, the mental trauma, the headaches, all that stuff. People say, "Brian, was it all worth the injury? Looking back on it, was it worth it? Would you change anything?" No, I wouldn't change anything. I'm glad it happened the way it did. If that's what it took for me to be the right guy at the right place at the right time, for a woman like Cody's mother who lost her only kid in battle to say, "Hey, your greatest fear, at least in this way, we can take care of that." And it made her feel better. That's called living with meaning. But I didn't get here by myself. People mentored me along. And it's because I found that mission I was living for that's greater than me because of the pain I went through. Don't let a good tragedy go bad. When you're going through pain, you're not thinking you're going to get anything out of it. There are diamonds hidden in our pain, people. Don't be too blind to see it. That's also why it's good to have other people in our lives, because they can often see things we can't. In the military, I was infantry. I was on the ground, but you know what? We had air support. Those are guys in airplanes and helicopters who come and blow up our enemies so we don't have to run up the mountain and do it ourselves. They can see our battlefield from a different perspective than we can, so we don't run into ambushes that we could easily avoid. It's the same thing in your life. Life is a battlefield. And we don't have to get ambushed if we have other people around us. So to close this out, I got this right here. You know what this is, right? It's a phone charger. It's an iPhone charger. Sorry, Androids. But that pretty much explains how I was able to get past the horrible, worst things in my life. I stayed plugged in. Not just to other people, but I stayed plugged into the mission that I discovered and I was presently in, that I chose to pursue. And each of you has that same opportunity with this organization to further help the veterans. I know Son talked about being committed and active. Look, if you're not active in something greater than yourself, you're missing out. I never would have gotten to the point I am personally. And yeah, look at career and all that, whatever, but personally, I've been able to get past stuff. There was stuff in it for me I didn't see when I started off, but I benefited from because it wasn't about me. And so I just want to say thank you for having me up here today. I want to say thank you to Son and everybody who does this, to Jeanette for arranging all of this. My life is better because all of you have been a part of it. This getting up here and talking, that's actually one of the greatest keys to my recovery over the past 12 years. It was all of you because you provided an audience and I was able to talk about things. You're actually responsible for that. And so I'm grateful for that. And so these three things I talked about, that meaning, that mentoring, and that mission, get those things in your life. They're all in that green booklet on your table. It's helped me, it's helped thousands of other people, and it'll work in your life too. Thank you.